Let's talk about car ownership costs in the Netherlands. When I was looking at moving to the Netherlands a couple years ago, one of the things that surprised me was how expensive it is to own a vehicle here. And I wanted to cover a few of these reasons why in this video. So in my previous video, I explained why I decided to own a car in the Netherlands, and I live in Amsterdam, which is, maybe not the most conducive for car ownership. Amsterdam is one of the least car-friendly cities probably in the world. It's definitely a bicycle-friendly place, but not so friendly for cars, and that makes sense. But I decided to own a car anyway, and I talked about that in my last video. If you haven't seen it, I'll link to it in the description below. But what I wanted to cover is also the costs of owning a vehicle in the Netherlands. There's a few costs that need to be considered. And in some cases, I think owning a vehicle in the Netherlands, regardless of whether you're in Amsterdam or not, owning a vehicle in the Netherlands is especially expensive. So I wanted to cover some of those reasons because as an American expat moving to the Netherlands, I was shocked at how expensive these costs were and how much it inflates the price of a vehicle compared to even other European countries. So I'm going to cover some of the costs in the Netherlands, but let me know in the comments below what you think about the cost of vehicle ownership in the Netherlands or where you're from. How does it compare after you watch this video? So I've kind of covered before in the US, in a lot of places, you kind of need to own a car, right? Like it's a car-centric culture. It's a car-centric place. So car ownership costs there generally are lower and the vehicle prices themselves are also lower. But generally in the US, costs are relatively low. So in the Netherlands, there are a few basic costs. So here are some of the regular costs you will incur. Aside from the price, which I'll come back to, you have sales tax for the vehicle. And in the Netherlands, sales tax is 21%. So not the highest in Europe by any means, but it's up there. It's one of the higher sales tax brackets. So that sales tax, 21%, is higher than the US, but that's also the price or the percentage for other goods. Now, the next big thing in the Netherlands on a vehicle is BPM. My Dutch isn't good enough to say the word, so I'll put it on the screen. But this is basically a tax based on the CO2 emissions of a vehicle. So this is something, that really can add up on the vehicle cost in the Netherlands. So it's based on the CO2 emissions of a vehicle. So electric vehicles don't pay any BPM, but for gasoline powered or diesel powered vehicles or even hybrids, this tax goes up, and it goes up quite quickly based on the CO2 emissions. So if you have a larger displacement engine, produces more CO2 emissions, the BPM tax is higher. So on top of the base price, on top of the VAT, or the tax, the sales tax, you have this BPM tax. Now, for a smaller car, like, my car's a 3-cylinder, the BPM tax is, it adds onto the price, but it's not as significant as something like a BMW M5. For a BMW M5 in the Netherlands, the BPM tax alone is 46,000 euros. So that adds to the price of the car, plus the tax, plus BPM, 46,000 euros on top of that normal price of an M5. That's the price of a car in and of itself. So even for cheaper cars like my car, BMW 1 Series, the BPM tax makes the price of a 1 Series the equivalent of a 3 Series price in other countries. So that's a huge tax that really tax on and brings up the price of a vehicle in the Netherlands. So the BPM tax was really something that surprised me when I was researching car prices in the Netherlands. In the US, you don't really have a tax based on vehicle engine size or CO2 emissions. So this was a big shock to me. I know other countries have taxes based on engine size, engine displacement, maybe also CO2 emissions. Let me know in the comments below, maybe your country has something similar. But BPM tax in the Netherlands really adds up the vehicle price. So these are two things that I've seen compared to, let's say, prices in Germany. The vehicle tax in Germany is 19%. They don't have BPM. I don't know if they have a similar tax. Maybe road tax is something that is equivalent, but I don't think it's as high as BPM. So the BPM tax, as you can see, for something like an M5, is the cost of a vehicle in and of itself. So you have to factor that in if you want to get a high performance or a bigger engine vehicle. Now, I did a video on pickup trucks in the Netherlands, and there's some special circumstances if you're a business owner for those pickup trucks. They don't pay that BPM tax. So go check out that video if you haven't seen it. The next main big expense in the Netherlands for why owning a car is much more expensive is the cost of fuel, or the cost of petrol. As of filming right now, in June of 2021, the average price of petroleum per liter is around €1.70 to €1.80 in the Netherlands. It varies where you go. You can find it on the lower ends. On the motorways, it's as much as €1.90 something cents. And this is per liter. So €1, let's say €1.70 per liter. If you were to convert that to US dollars in gallons, it's the equivalent of between $7 and $8 per gallon. Now, I know it's not fair to compare, euros versus dollars, liters versus gallons. There's much more driving in the US. I get that. But just to put it into perspective, the cost of gasoline in the Netherlands is around $7 US per gallon, or around €1.70 per liter. And that's even higher than some of the neighboring European countries. So in Germany, in France, and Belgium, I found that the price per liter is on average about 30 to 40 cents cheaper. So you can find gas around €1.30, €1.40. Still more expensive than the US for sure, but way less expensive than the Netherlands. So on top of higher taxes, BPM based on the vehicle emissions, you also have higher prices for petroleum. There's a lot of additional taxes that are rolled into the price of gas, and that's what makes that cost more expensive. Now, what's interesting with two of these things that I've just mentioned, so BPM, electric vehicles don't pay BPM, right? There's no CO2 emissions, so they don't pay any BPM. And obviously you're not paying for petroleum, you're not paying for gasoline, so you're not paying that high price for gasoline. Now you start to see some of the advantages of owning an electric vehicle in the Netherlands, and you see a lot of them out on the roads here. Now, obviously, in terms of monthly costs, it really depends on whether you buy your car outright, you choose to lease, or you finance it. So I'm not going to talk about those types of costs. Those can vary greatly. Also, some people get company cars in the Netherlands. So one of the advantages from their employers is the company pays for a car. There are different tax loopholes and tax things for that. I'm not going to cover that here. Just talking about the basic vehicle costs. In addition, there is a quarterly road tax. So this, I believe, is based on the weight of a vehicle. Now, I don't think electric vehicles have to pay any road tax either. So the quarterly road tax is another cost that is avoided. It's not a significant cost. It, again, varies based on, I think, the weight of the vehicle, maybe also the size and the emissions of it. Yeah, this is something that's an additional cost to owning a vehicle in the Netherlands. So I covered obviously the price of the vehicle, the tax, the sales tax, that is, the BPM, the cost of petrol or gasoline. I mentioned there's a quarterly road tax as well, so that's another cost. Of course, insurance is something you need to think about. This can vary greatly depending on your situation, your vehicle. So yeah, there's several costs to consider when you own a car. Now, in my situation, I live in Amsterdam. To get a street parking permit in Amsterdam, in most places of Amsterdam, there's a wait time to have a street parking permit. In my case, it was 4 months. So you also can't apply for a parking permit until you have the car. You're kind of in a chicken and egg situation because you can't apply for the parking permit until you have the car. You have to wait for that, so you can't actually park it on the street. And then, what are you supposed to do? So in my situation, I rented a private garage for about 4 or 5 months while I was waiting for the parking permit to go through. And that was an additional cost that I had to consider when I was getting my car. So that was around €200 a month. That price varies depending on where in Amsterdam you need to park. But yeah, that's an additional cost that you may need to think about. In some places in Amsterdam or other big cities in the Netherlands, you don't have street parking as an option. So you have to kind of pay for a garage. And that's an additional cost to think about. The actual street permit cost wasn't much. I think in my scenario, it was about €180 for every 6 months for street parking in Amsterdam. So that's not too bad. But it was the wait time to get the parking permit that really added up. Now, a couple other costs to consider in the Netherlands. Obviously, maintenance and repair. That's something you would need to do in anywhere for any vehicle. And that's going to depend on your driving, how much you drive, what kind of car it is, if it's under warranty, that type of stuff. The Netherlands doesn't mandate winter tires, but if you go somewhere like Germany or Switzerland or some parts of France that do require winter tires, you may also want to consider having a pair of winter tires or a set of winter tires on hand. Another cost to consider is a inspection cost. So in the Netherlands, I think after a vehicle is 3 years old, it has to be inspected, I believe, once a year. And this is for roadworthiness, making sure that, you know, it's in good working condition. So that's an additional cost you may need to think about if your vehicle is older than 3 years old. You'll have to do a regular inspection and then potentially fix things if they need to be fixed to pass that inspection. So now you can see why car ownership is so expensive in the Netherlands. For me, it was a big shock, especially compared to the US with all of those different costs that I mentioned. Now, for me personally, I chose to private lease a 118i. I'll do a future video about private leasing, but it basically rolls all of those costs into one, so it makes it a little bit simpler. But yeah, I chose to lease a 1 Series because it's basically the cost of a 3 Series in some other markets. So I would have loved to have a 3 Series, but because of all of these costs in the Netherlands with car ownership, living in Amsterdam, etc., you know, I decided to go with a 118i. So I'll do a future video about that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How do the costs compare to where you live? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.